There are two kinds of fathers who send their children away: the ones who do it because they stopped loving them, and the ones who do it because someone convinced them that love looked like letting go. The hardest part isn't figuring out which kind you had. The hardest part is standing in a hospital hallway 7 years later, watching a man look at your face like it's a wall, like it's nothing, like you are a stranger he is too tired to learn. My name is Nora Callahan. I was 17 the night my dad told me to leave. I was 24 the morning I came back. And the 40 seconds he looked at me without knowing my name are the 40 seconds I have been trying to understand ever since. Before I take you into that hospital room, hit like and subscribe. It costs you nothing and it helps this channel more than I can explain. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I read all of them. I mean that. Let me take you back to the beginning. My dad's name is Robert Callahan. Everyone called him Bobby. He was a high school shop teacher for 22 years in a small town in central Pennsylvania called Granger's Mill. Population 4,000, one stoplight, a pizza place that had been open since 1987 and smelled like the inside of a good memory. He was the kind of man who fixed things, not in a showy way, in a quiet, steady way. Our porch railing, our neighbor's furnace, the alternator on Mrs. Pittman's Buick when she couldn't afford a mechanic. He had hands that knew what to do before his brain caught up. He kept a folded square of sandpaper in his back pocket the way other men kept wallets. My mother died when I was 9. Ovarian cancer, stage 4. 3 months from diagnosis to the end. My dad sat at her bedside every single night. He slept in the chair by the window with a hospital blanket over his shoulders and a paperback he never opened face down on his knee. After she was gone, he didn't cry in front of me. He cried in the garage. I could hear the difference between the sound of him working late and the sound of him falling apart. They weren't the same sound. We figured it out together, him and me. Grilled cheese and tomato soup on Tuesdays. The History Channel on Sunday nights. He came to every swim meet, every parent-teacher night, every school play, even the years I wasn't in it, just because he said he liked to see the kids who were. We weren't a family that talked about feelings out loud. We were a family that showed up. For 8 years, showing up was enough. Then Diane walked into his life on a Wednesday night in March at a church fundraiser he almost didn't go to. I want to be careful here, because this isn't a story about a monster. Diane wasn't a monster. She was a woman with her own wounds and her own agenda, and a very particular skill for making people feel chosen. She was 41 to his 53. She had 2 kids from a previous marriage, a son named Tyler who was 15 and a daughter named Bryn who was 13. She wore her hair the same way my mother had, and I have thought about that more times than I want to admit. My dad lit up when she was around. It was visible. Like someone had replaced the bulb in him. He smiled differently. He made reservations at restaurants instead of just the pizza place. He bought a new flannel. He asked me once over the Tuesday grilled cheese if I thought he deserved to be happy again. I said yes, I meant it. I was 16. I didn't know yet that some people hear that word as permission to stop paying attention. By the time I was 17, Diane had been in our house for 14 months. Tyler had my dad's old bedroom because his room was smaller, a decision that happened one weekend while I was at a swim meet and came home to a different floor plan. Bryn used the good bathroom. Diane had a drawer next to my dad's side of the bed and a standing appointment at a salon in the next town over that he paid for with a card she'd convinced him to add her name to. None of these things alone would have broken anything. I know that. I've had years to think about it. What broke it was the accumulation, the math of 1,000 small subtractions. My dad started coming home later. Not dramatically, not all at once, but by degrees. 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour. Shop classes kept him, he said. Grading, he said. Diane would have dinner on the table and she would look at me when he sat down. A look that said, "See how I take care of him. See what I do." "What do you do?" She had a phrase she used constantly, "this family." As in, this family needs to be on the same page. As in, for this family to work, everyone has to pull their weight. The word family in her mouth always meant something slightly different than what it meant in mine. In October of my junior year, I found a credit card statement on the kitchen counter. Not hidden. Just there, the way things are left out when someone wants them found or has stopped caring about being careful. The balance was $4,800. The purchases were a weekend hotel in New York, a bracelet from a store I'd never heard of, 3 dinners at restaurants in Philadelphia. I had not been to New York. I had not been to New York. I had not been given a bracelet. I put the statement back where I found it. I took a photo of it first. I didn't show it to my dad that night. Or the next night. I was watching. The watching was something I had been doing quietly for months. I kept a notes app on my phone. Dates and small things. The grocery budget that had quietly doubled since Diane moved in. The difference quietly absorbed into my dad's salary without discussion. The car insurance on Tyler's truck that had appeared on a bill addressed to Robert Callahan. The weekend trips that my dad took alone, except he never used to take weekend trips alone, and his stories about where he'd been didn't always match the weather reports for those cities. I was 17. I was not a private investigator. I was a girl with a notes app and a bad feeling and a dead mother and a father who had stopped checking if I'd eaten. There was a guidance counselor at school named Mr. Fasick. He was the kind of adult who understood that sometimes a student sitting in his doorway at 7:45 in the morning wasn't there about college applications. He let me sit. He asked nothing. He got me water. After a while, he said, "Is there someone in your life from before who you trust?" I thought about it. I said my Aunt Rosie. My mother's sister, 60, retired librarian, Allentown, a woman who sent actual paper birthday cards with actual handwriting, and never once said anything kind about Diane. He said, "Write her a letter. Not a text. A letter. Put what you know in it." I went home that night and I wrote 3 pages longhand. I want to pause here. If you have ever watched someone you loved get slowly turned away from you, not by force, but by inches, drop the word compass in the comments. I want to know how many of us there are in this. Because what comes next is the part I have never said out loud to more than 3 people, and I need to know I'm not alone in it before I keep going. The night my dad told me to leave, it was February. Cold the way February is cold in Pennsylvania, which is mean about it. Personal. Diane had found the Notes app. She had borrowed my phone that afternoon to look up a recipe, she said. And she had not looked up a recipe, she said. And she had not looked up a recipe. My dad was already home when I got back from swim practice. He was standing in the kitchen, not sitting. That was the first thing. He stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and Diane beside him with her hands folded like a woman at a church meeting, and Tyler was on the stairs pretending he was somewhere else. My dad said, "Nora, Diane showed me some things on your phone." I said, "Okay." He said, "You've been spying on this family." I said, "I've been paying attention." He said, "That's the same thing." I said it wasn't. He said, "You want to tell me what you thought you were going to do with all of this?" I said, "I was going to show it to you when I had enough." He said, "Enough what?" I said, "Enough that you couldn't explain it away." Diane's hands unfolded. She put one on my dad's arm. She said, "Bobby, she's been building a case against our family for months." I said, "Against you, not against him." And here is where it happened. Here is the 45 seconds I have played back in the dark on more nights than I can count. My dad looked at me, and I watched him make a decision. Not a loud decision. A quiet one. I watched it move across his face like weather. I watched him choose her version of the story over mine, not because he believed it, but because believing mine would have cost him something he wasn't willing to pay. He said, "I think you need to go stay with Rosie for a while." I said, "Dad." He said, "I need some time to think. We all need some space." I said, "Dad, please look at me." He looked at the counter. He said, "Take what you need for tonight. I'll have the rest packed." I stood in my kitchen for 12 seconds, and I understood something I had not understood before about the word abandoned. It doesn't always mean someone leaves you. Sometimes it means someone stays exactly where they are while you disappear. I took my swim bag. I took the box of my mother's jewelry from my closet shelf. I took the photo from my nightstand, my dad and me at Lake Wallenpaupack the summer I was 12. Him in a terrible fishing hat, me laughing at the hat. I did not cry until Aunt Rosie's driveway. I cried so hard her porch light blurred. Rosie opened the door before I reached it. She had her coat already on over her pajamas. She had the kettle already on. She pulled me inside and she held on and she didn't say a word until I was done. Then she said, "You're staying." I said, "I don't want to be a burden." She said, "Nora Margaret Callahan, you are the last piece of your mother I have. You are not a burden. You are the point." I stayed. Allentown was 40 minutes from Granger's Mill and a different kind of world. Smaller apartment, bigger library, a bus route, a high school where nobody knew me. I enrolled the Monday after I arrived. I swam on their team. I finished junior year. I finished senior year. My dad paid child support, not because he wanted to, I think, but because Rosie made a single quiet phone call to a family attorney and the checks started appearing. He called twice in the first year. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Both times the message was short and soft and guilty in a way that made me angrier than anger. Because guilt without action is just self-pity, wearing a sad face. By the time I was 19, I had stopped waiting for the phone. I got a scholarship. Nursing school in Philadelphia, 2 years. Then a BSN at Drexel. I worked nights at Jefferson Hospital during school. I learned to read vital signs the way my dad had taught me to read wood grain, with my hands, with patience, with the understanding that what's on the surface is not always what's underneath. I didn't go back to Granger's Mill. Not for 4 years. The thing about leaving a place is that it doesn't leave you. The pizza place that smelled like good memories. The shop classroom that smelled like sawdust and machine oil. The sound of the furnace in the old house clicking on at 6 a.m. Those things are stored somewhere you can't empty. I was 23 when Rosie called me on a Tuesday morning in November. She said, "Sit down, honey." I sat. She said, "Your dad had a stroke." She said it came on at school. He was in third period shop, demonstrating a dovetail joint on a pine board. And he sat down on the stool he kept by the workbench and a student named Marcus, 16 years old, had the presence of mind to call 911 instead of waiting for a teacher. She said he was stable. She said the left side had some weakness. She said there was something else the doctors wanted to discuss in person. I drove to Granger's Mill that night, alone. The 40-minute drive felt like a geography I was relearning after years off the map. Diane was not at the hospital. I want to let that sentence sit there for a moment, the way it sat with me when the floor nurse said it. Diane was not at the hospital. She had come the first night, the nurse said. And then she had not come back. Her name was still on the emergency contact form. Nobody had told her to leave. She simply had not returned. I later learned from a woman named Carol who had taught chemistry at my dad's school for 18 years that Diane had filed for divorce the previous spring. Quietly. No announcement. The marriage had lasted 4 years. She had moved Tyler and Bryn to her sister's place in Delaware. She had taken the car and the joint savings account and the bracelet and left behind the furniture and the cable bill and a man who had traded his daughter for her. My dad had been living alone in the Granger's Mill house for 7 months. Nobody had told me. Because nobody thought I needed to know. Or because nobody thought I would come. I don't know which. Maybe both. The stroke had done something to his memory. That's how Dr. Ewan explained it to me in a consultation room with a whiteboard and a box of tissues someone had thought to put on the table. She said the word aphasia first, which I knew from nursing school. She said his language processing was impaired. She said there was significant disruption to episodic memory, the kind of memory that holds the story of your life in order. She said, "He may not know you at first. I want to prepare you for that." I said, "I'm a nurse. I've seen this." She looked at me the way doctors look at medical people who are about to discover that clinical knowledge and personal grief are not the same country. She said, "I know you have. But it's different when it's yours." I said, "I know." She was right. I did not know. Not yet. He was in room 114. End of the hall, window overlooking the parking structure. A get well card from his shop classes was taped to the wall, 43 signatures in different handwriting. some of them with little drawings of wood joints and power tools. I stood outside the door for a long time looking at that card. Then I went in. He was sitting up. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not old exactly. Quieter. The hands that were always doing something were folded on the blanket, still. He was watching a weather report on the TV mounted in the corner. He heard the door. He looked over. I said, "Hey, Dad." He looked at me. Not through me. Not away from me. At me. With the focus of someone trying very hard to locate something they know is there. I counted. 40 seconds. I know because I held my breath, and I have a nurse's habit of counting when I'm not supposed to feel. At 40 seconds, something crossed his face. Not recognition exactly. Something before recognition. The outline of it. The shape of a memory pressing from the wrong side of a door. He said in the slowed, effortful way of someone relearning speech, "You have her eyes." I said, "Yeah, Dad. I do." He said, "Who are you?" And I stood there in room 114 with my mother's eyes and my dad's daughter's face, and I said the truest thing I knew. I said, "I'm yours." He didn't say anything. He looked back at the weather report. Rain moving in from the west. High of 34. I sat in the chair by the window. I stayed for 3 hours. I didn't need him to know my name to stay. Let me stop here for a second. If you are sitting somewhere right now and your jaw is tight, just breathe for a moment. I see you. And if you have ever walked back into a room where someone didn't recognize you, not just a hospital room, but any room, any relationship, any version of going home and finding a stranger where your person used to be, tap that like button. Reach through the screen. Let me know you're here, because this isn't the ending, not even close. I moved back to Granger's Mill, not into the house, not at first. I rented a studio above the hardware store on Maple, 2 rooms, a radiator that knocked at 3 a.m., a window that looked out over the intersection by the old pizza place. I transferred my nursing credentials to Geisinger Holy Spirit, 20 minutes north. I became his person. Not because I was obligated. I want to be very clear about that. I became his person because I made a choice. The same way he had made a choice in that kitchen 7 years before, and I wanted my choice to be something I could live in. 3 times a week I drove to the rehabilitation facility where he'd been transferred after the hospital. I brought him coffee, black, the way he'd always taken it. I brought him crossword puzzles, the easy ones first, then harder. I brought him sandpaper sometimes, just a square of it folded in my pocket, and one afternoon without planning to, I took it out and held it out to him and watched his hands unfold from the blanket, and take it and turn it over and feel the grain without knowing why. The occupational therapist, a woman named June who wore her hair in a practical bun and had a way of talking about the brain like it was a neighborhood that had survived a flood, said his hands remembered things his conscious memory hadn't gotten back to yet. She called it procedural memory, the body knowing what the mind has misplaced. I thought about that for a long time. Progress was slow. Some weeks it moved and some weeks it didn't. He relearned words. He learned my name eventually, the way you might learn the name of someone on your floor at a long-term stay facility, Nora. She comes on Tuesdays and Thursdays and sometimes Saturdays. She brings coffee. He did not, for most of that first year, know that I was his daughter. I did not perform grief about this in front of him. I brought the coffee. I brought the crosswords. I talked about small things, the weather, the road work on Route 45, the fact that Marcus, the student who had called 911, had been accepted to Penn State Pre-Med and had sent a card. My dad listened. His eyes tracked me. Sometimes he smiled at something I said, a reflex smile, the kind that doesn't need context. I held on to those smiles like I was collecting something rare. It was a Sunday in April, 14 months after the stroke. A warm day, the kind that Pennsylvania offers in April like an apology for February. I had brought him outside to the facility's garden. He sat in a wheelchair with a blanket over his lap even though he didn't need it anymore. Habit. I sat on a bench beside him. We had been outside for maybe 30 minutes without saying much. A cardinal was doing something complicated in the shrub nearby. My dad said, out of nowhere, "You used to hate that fishing hat." I went very still. He said, While in Papak, you laughed the whole drive home. I said the hat had a patch on it that said masturbator. He said, I know what it said. I said, you bought it on purpose. He said, of course I did. And then he turned and looked at me, not the searching look, not the 40-second silence of someone pressing at a locked door. He looked at me the way he had looked at me across the Tuesday grilled cheese table when I was 12, which is to say, like I was a person he recognized all the way down. He said, Nora. Just my name. One word. Like he was testing the weight of it. I said, yeah, Dad. He said, I'm sorry. I didn't say it's okay because it wasn't, and I have learned not to offer that word when I don't mean it. I said, I know. He said, she wasn't worth it. I said, no. He said, you came back. I said, I did. He looked at the cardinal. It was still doing whatever it was doing in the shrub, unconcerned with the weight of what was happening 2 feet away. He said, your mother would have come back too. I said, I know, Dad. I know she would have. We sat in that garden for another hour. He drifted in and out, the way he still did, present then away, then back again, like a signal that came and went depending on the weather. But in those minutes when he was really there. Not a man looking at a wall. My dad in a garden in April with the fishing hat joke between us like proof. He is 61 now. He lives in a ground floor apartment 6 minutes from the hardware store studio I still rent, though the apartment has more rooms now and a better radiator. His memory does not work the way it did before the stroke. It likely never will. There are days when my name takes him a moment to find. There are days when he looks at me with that searching look and I just sit with him in it and wait. There are also days when he is fully himself. When he talks about my mother with a clarity that makes me think grief is its own kind of procedural memory, stored somewhere the stroke couldn't reach. On those days we have grilled cheese and tomato soup. We watch the History Channel. I sit across from him and he looks at me with my mother's eyes, and I think about the 40 seconds in room 1114 when he looked at me like a wall and how that could have been the whole story. It wasn't. Diane, as far as I know, is in Delaware with Tyler and Bryn. We have had no contact. I don't carry anger toward her the way I thought I would. Anger is expensive and my energy goes to better things. What I carry is something more like information. A lesson about how quickly love can be redirected when the right person knows which wires to touch. What I carry more is something my Aunt Rosie said to me on the morning after I came back from the hospital the first time. I called her from the parking structure, sitting in my car, not crying but close. She said, how was he? I said, he didn't know me. She said, but you knew him. I said, yeah. She said, that's enough to start. I want to end with something I have never said in a public way before. The night my dad told me to leave, I believed for a long time that the story was about being thrown away. About being worth less than a woman with the right smile, and the right timing, and the right hands on the right arm in the right kitchen. I have spent 7 years understanding that the story was never about my worth. It was about his fear. A man who had already lost one person he loved more than his own comfort, who found someone who made that loss feel smaller, who made a choice from inside that fear that he could not see clearly until it was too late, and the choice had already cost him the one thing he could not afford to lose. He sent me away because he was afraid of being alone. He just didn't know that sending me away was the loneliest thing he could have done. When I walked back into room 114 and he looked at me like a wall, I thought the fear I'd carried for 7 years was going to swallow me whole. It didn't. Because standing in that room, I understood something he could not say, and I could not hear out loud yet. He had been alone in that house for 7 months before the stroke. 7 months without Diane, without her kids, without me. Cooking for one in a kitchen that still had my mother's measuring cups on the shelf, watching the History Channel without anyone beside him, keeping the lights on because the dark was louder. He had already been living inside the consequence of his choice. The stroke did not take me from him. He had already let me go. I came back anyway, not because he deserved it. That is not the calculation I used. I came back because I am my father's daughter, and my father was a man who showed up, who fixed things, who sat in a hospital chair with an unopened book and never left. I came back because somewhere under the fear and the bad choice and the stranger looking at me from a hospital bed, that man was still in there. And he was. He is. He's in the other room right now with a square of sandpaper in his back pocket that he doesn't remember putting there. And that's enough. If you made it to the end of this, thank you. I know this one wasn't easy. I know some of you heard your own kitchens in it, your own hallways, your own 40 seconds in a doorway waiting for someone to know your name. Drop one word in the comments. Just one word. What would you have done? Stayed? Left? Waited? I read every one. I answer the ones I can. If you want to hear what happened when Diane's son Tyler reached out to me 4 years after I left, that story is linked right below this video. It's not what I expected. You are not too much. You are not too little. You are paying attention. See you there.